What would you do if following orders meant destroying your soul? What if the uniform you wore with pride demanded that you commit an act so horrific that your ancestors would weep in the spirit world? And what if refusing that order meant facing a firing squad yourself, executed by the very nation you had sworn to defend? This is not a hypothetical question. This is what happened to a group of Apache soldiers in 1944, men whose names were erased from official records, whose stories were buried in classified archives, and whose fate remained unknown for over 60 years. What I am about to tell you has never been discussed on mainstream platforms. The documents I will reference were sealed by military intelligence until 2009, and the truth they reveal will force you to question everything you thought you knew about honor, obedience, and the price of moral courage. Before we continue, I need your help. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. Your city, your state, your country. And if this channel has ever shown you a side of history that the textbooks ignored, please hit that subscribe button. We are fighting to bring these forgotten stories to light, but we cannot do it without you. Every subscription helps us reach more people who deserve to know the truth. Subscribe now and become part of this mission. Now, let me take you to a place that most Americans have never heard of. In the autumn of 1943, the United States Army established a special training facility in the mountains of southern Arizona, not far from the San Carlos Apache Reservation. The facility had no official name. In internal documents, it was referred to only as Site 11. Its purpose was to train Native American soldiers for unconventional warfare operations behind enemy lines in Europe and the Pacific. The Army had discovered that Native American recruits possessed skills that were extraordinarily valuable in combat. They could move through terrain without making a sound. They could track enemy movements by reading signs that other soldiers could not even perceive. They could survive in wilderness conditions that would kill most men within days. And perhaps most importantly, they possessed a warrior tradition that stretched back thousands of years, a cultural inheritance that made them fearless in battle and absolutely loyal to their brothers in arms. Among the recruits selected for Site 11 were 17 young men from the Apache tribe. They came from different bands, Chiricahua, Mescalero, Western Apache, but they shared a common heritage. Their grandfathers had fought against the American cavalry. Their great-grandfathers had ridden with Geronimo and Cochise. The blood of legendary warriors flowed through their veins, and the Army intended to use that warrior spirit for its own purposes. The commanding officer at Site 11 was a colonel named Theodore Ashford. He was a career military man with a reputation for achieving results through methods that other officers found distasteful. Ashford believed that Native American soldiers needed to be stripped of what he called their sentimental attachments before they could become effective instruments of war. He implemented a training program designed to break down their cultural identity and rebuild them as perfect killing machines. The Apache recruits were forbidden from speaking their native language. They were punished for any display of traditional customs. They were forced to participate in exercises designed to desensitize them to violence, including the killing of animals in increasingly brutal ways. Ashford told them that a warrior who hesitates is a warrior who dies, and that mercy was a weakness that the enemy would exploit. Most of the recruits adapted to the training. They understood that war required sacrifices, and they were willing to bury parts of themselves if it meant protecting their families back home. But a small group of Apache soldiers began to have doubts. They whispered to each other at night about the things they were being asked to do. They wondered whether becoming monsters was truly necessary to defeat monsters. They prayed to the spirits of their ancestors for guidance. The leader of this group was a 23-year-old man named Joseph Running Bear. He had grown up on the San Carlos Reservation, listening to his grandfather's stories about the old ways, about the code of honor that had governed Apache warriors for generations. His grandfather had taught him that a true warrior never harmed women or children. never tortured prisoners, and never killed except when absolutely necessary. These principles were not signs of weakness. They were the foundation of warrior strength, the spiritual discipline that separated a protector from a murderer. Running Bear kept his doubts to himself during the months of training at Site 11. He excelled in every physical test. He earned the respect of his instructors. He was selected for the most elite unit being formed at the facility, a 12-man squad designated for deployment to the European theater. But inside, a conflict was growing. He sensed that he was being prepared for something that would violate everything his grandfather had taught him. He did not yet know what that something was. In March of 1944, Running Bear's unit was transported to England and then to a staging area in southern Italy. The Allied forces were preparing for the invasion of mainland Europe, and special operations teams were being inserted behind German lines to gather intelligence, sabotage infrastructure, and spread terror among the enemy. Running Bear's squad was assigned to a classified operation in the mountains of central Italy, a region controlled by German forces and populated by Italian civilians whose loyalties were uncertain. The mission briefing was conducted by a major from Army Intelligence named William Hartley. Hartley explained that the Germans had established a network of informants in the mountain villages, civilians who reported Allied movements in exchange for food and protection. These informants were responsible for the deaths of dozens of American soldiers. Hartley said that the informant network had to be destroyed, and that Running Bear's squad had been selected for the job. What Hartley described next would haunt the Apache soldiers for the rest of their lives. The squad was ordered to enter 3 villages suspected of harboring informants. They were to identify anyone who had collaborated with the Germans, and they were to execute those collaborators on the spot, regardless of age or gender. Hartley emphasized that this was not a combat mission. There would be no firefight, no exchange of gunfire with enemy soldiers. The targets were unarmed civilians, including women who had traded information for medicine and elderly men who had simply tried to survive the occupation. Hartley anticipated resistance to the order. He told the squad that the rules of conventional warfare did not apply to counterinsurgency operations. He said that killing collaborators would send a message to other villages that cooperation with the Germans had fatal consequences. He said that the lives of American soldiers depended on the squad's willingness to do what was necessary, and he reminded them that refusing a direct order in wartime was punishable by death. Joseph Running Bear listened to the briefing in silence. His face betrayed no emotion, but inside, something was breaking. He looked at the other Apache soldiers in the room and saw the same horror reflected in their eyes. They had trained to fight enemy combatants. They had prepared themselves to kill German soldiers in battle. But this was something entirely different. This was murder. That night, Running Bear gathered 5 of his fellow Apache soldiers in a bombed-out farmhouse outside the staging area. Their names were Thomas Whitehawk, Samuel Grey Wolf, Daniel Eagleclaw, Michael Sunwalker, and Robert Blackstone. These men had become brothers during the brutal months at Site 11. They had bled together, suffered together, and kept each other sane when the training pushed them to the edge of madness. Now they faced the most difficult decision of their lives. Running Bear spoke first. He said that he could not carry out the order. He said that killing unarmed women and old men was not warfare, but slaughter. He said that if he did this thing, he would never be able to face his grandfather in the spirit world. He would become something less than human, something that the Apache warrior tradition explicitly condemned. He said he would rather die with his honor intact than live as a murderer. One by one, the other 5 soldiers agreed. Thomas Whitehawk said that his grandmother had been killed by American soldiers during the reservation wars, and that he had joined the army to prove that Apaches could be patriots, not to become the same kind of killer who had destroyed his family. Samuel Grey Wolf said that the spirits of his ancestors were watching, and that he would not shame them. Daniel Eagleclaw said simply that some orders should not be followed. The 6 Apache soldiers made a pact that night. They would refuse the mission. They would explain their reasons to their commanding officers, and they would accept whatever consequences followed. They understood that they might be executed for insubordination. They understood that their families would be told they had died as cowards or traitors. They understood that their names would be erased from history. But they also understood that there are things worse than death, and that becoming complicit in atrocities was one of them. Before they separated that night, Joseph Running Bear performed a brief ceremony that his grandfather had taught him. He did not have the traditional items, no sacred tobacco, no eagle feathers, no medicine bundle, but he had his voice, and he had the words that had been passed down through generations of Apache warriors. He sang quietly, so the guards would not hear, a song asking the Creator for strength and clarity. He asked the spirits of their ancestors to watch over them in the trials ahead. He asked for courage to face death with dignity, if death was what awaited them. Thomas Whitehawk later wrote about that moment in a letter that was never sent. The letter was found among his possessions after his disappearance and eventually made its way to his family. In it, he described feeling a warmth enter the ruined farmhouse, despite the cold Italian night. He described sensing presences around them, invisible but unmistakable, the spirits of warriors who had faced impossible choices in their own times. He wrote that in that moment, he knew they were making the right decision. Whatever happened to their bodies, their souls would remain intact. Samuel Greywolf spoke last before they returned to their quarters. He was the oldest of the group at 27, a quiet man who rarely shared his thoughts. But that night, he told the others about a vision he had experienced during a sweat lodge ceremony before the war. In the vision, he had seen himself standing at a crossroads in a foreign land. One path led through fire and blood to a destination shrouded in darkness. The other path led through shadow and suffering to a place filled with light. He said he had not understood the vision until that night. Now he knew which path he was meant to take. The 6 soldiers returned to their bunks knowing that everything would change in the morning. They did not sleep. They lay in the darkness, each man alone with his thoughts, his prayers, his memories of home. Outside, the Italian mountains loomed black against a sky scattered with stars. Somewhere in those mountains, villages full of innocent people slept unaware that their fate was being decided by men they would never meet. And in the morning, 6 Apache warriors would stand up and say that those lives mattered more than their own. The next morning, Joseph Running Bear requested a meeting with Major Hartley. He spoke calmly and respectfully. He explained that he and 5 other members of the squad could not carry out the order to execute civilians. He cited the warrior code of his people. He cited the laws of warfare that protected non-combatants. He cited his own conscience and his faith in a creator who would hold him accountable for his actions. Hartley listened without interruption. When Running Bear finished speaking, the Major's face was expressionless. He asked whether Running Bear understood the consequences of refusing a direct order. Running Bear said that he did. Hartley asked whether the other 5 soldiers were prepared to face those consequences as well. Running Bear said that they were. What happened next was recorded in a classified document that was not declassified until 2009. The document, designated Army Intelligence Report 773-44, describes the events of the following 72 hours in clinical bureaucratic language. But between the lines of that official report lies a story of courage, cruelty, and a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the American military command. Major Hartley immediately placed the 6 Apache soldiers under arrest. They were confined to a stone cellar beneath the farmhouse that served as the unit's headquarters. Their weapons were confiscated. Their personal effects were seized, including letters from family members, photographs, and traditional items that held spiritual significance. They were given no food and only minimal water. Guards were posted at the entrance with orders to shoot anyone who attempted to escape. For 3 days, the 6 soldiers waited in that cellar. They sang Apache songs to keep their spirits strong. They prayed to the Creator and to the spirits of their ancestors. They talked about their families, their homes, the land they had grown up on. They did not speak about what might be coming. They did not need to. On the 3rd day, Colonel Ashford arrived from Site 11. He had been flown to Italy specifically to deal with the situation. Ashford was furious. He had invested months in training these men, shaping them into weapons, and now they were defying him at the crucial moment. He descended into the cellar alone, carrying only a sidearm and a folder of documents. Ashford offered the 6 soldiers a choice. They could reconsider their position, carry out the mission as ordered, and return to their unit with no disciplinary action. Their refusal would be forgotten. Their records would remain clean. They would continue to serve their country with honor. All they had to do was say yes. Joseph Running Bear answered for the group. He said no. What followed was documented in the testimony of a military policeman named Sergeant Frank Morrison, who was stationed outside the cellar during Ashford's visit. Morrison heard shouting, sounds of physical violence, and what he described as a long, terrible silence. When Ashford emerged 45 minutes later, his uniform was disheveled and his knuckles were bloody. He ordered Morrison to arrange transport for the prisoners and to speak to no one about what had occurred. The 6 Apache soldiers were taken from the cellar that night. They were transported in a covered truck to a location that Morrison could not identify. He never saw them again. When he asked his commanding officer what had happened to the prisoners, he was told that the matter was classified and that he should forget he had ever seen them. The official record states that Joseph Running Bear, Thomas Whitehawk, Samuel Greywolf, Daniel Eagleclaw, Michael Sunwalker, and Robert Blackstone were killed in action during a combat operation in central Italy on March 19, 1944. Letters were sent to their families expressing condolences and praising their sacrifice. Medals were issued posthumously. Their names were inscribed on memorials alongside thousands of other fallen soldiers. But the official record is a lie. Fragments of the truth began to emerge decades later, when researchers investigating the treatment of Native American soldiers during World War II discovered inconsistencies in the documentation. The combat operation that supposedly killed the 6 Apache soldiers never happened. The coordinates listed in the casualty reports corresponded to an empty field where no fighting had ever taken place. And the dates on the official documents had been altered multiple times, suggesting a deliberate effort to obscure what had actually occurred. In 2007, an elderly woman in New Mexico contacted a journalist who had been writing about Native American military history. Her name was Mary Eagleclaw, and she was the sister of Daniel Eagleclaw, one of the 6 soldiers. Mary was 91 years old and knew she did not have much time left. She wanted to tell someone the truth before she died. Mary said that in 1946, 2 years after her brother's supposed death in combat, she received a visit from a man she did not know. The man was white, middle-aged, and spoke with a slight German accent. He told her that he had served alongside Daniel in Italy. He told her that Daniel had not died in battle. He told her something else, something so disturbing that Mary had kept it secret for over 60 years, afraid that speaking it aloud would put her own life in danger. The man told Mary that Daniel and the 5 other Apache soldiers had been executed by their own commanders. They had been shot in the back of the head and buried in unmarked graves somewhere in the Italian mountains. Their crime was not cowardice or desertion. Their crime was refusing to murder innocent people. They had been killed for having consciences. Mary asked the man why he was telling her this. Why now, 2 years after the war had ended? Why come to her with this terrible knowledge when she had finally begun to accept her brother's death and find some measure of peace? The man said that he could not live with the secret any longer. He said that he had been present when the executions took place. He had not participated directly, but he had done nothing to stop it. He had followed orders, kept his mouth shut, and tried to forget what he had witnessed. But forgetting was impossible. The faces of those 6 Apache soldiers haunted his dreams. Their voices echoed in his mind during waking hours. He felt their eyes watching him whenever he looked in a mirror. He told Mary that Joseph Running Bear had been the last to die. The others had been executed first, one by one, while Running Bear was forced to watch. Colonel Ashford wanted to break him, to make him beg for mercy, to prove that his warrior courage was nothing but primitive superstition that would crumble in the face of modern military power. But Running Bear did not break. He sang an Apache death song as each of his brothers fell. He looked into Ashford's eyes without flinching when his own turn came, and his final words, spoken in his native language, were a curse upon those who had betrayed them. The man told Mary that he believed the curse was real. He said that everyone involved in the executions had suffered terrible fates in the years since. Accidents, illnesses, suicides, madness. Colonel Ashford himself had died under mysterious circumstances in 1945, just months after the war ended. His body was found in his office at a military base in Virginia, but the cause of death was never determined. The official report listed heart failure, but the man said that Ashford's face had been frozen in an expression of absolute terror, as if he had seen something in his final moments that no human being should ever witness. Mary asked the man what he wanted from her. He said he wanted nothing except forgiveness. He wanted her to know that her brother had died a hero, not a coward. He wanted her to understand that Daniel and the others had made a choice that most men would not have the courage to make. And he wanted someone to remember the truth, even if that truth could never be spoken publicly. Before he left, the man gave Mary a small object wrapped in cloth. He said it had belonged to Daniel, that he had taken it from the body before the burial. Mary unwrapped the cloth and found a stone arrowhead on a leather cord, an heirloom that Daniel had worn since childhood. She held it against her heart and wept. She never saw the man again. She never learned his name. But she kept the arrowhead for the rest of her life, and she kept the secret until she was 91 years old and felt death approaching. Only then did she decide that the truth needed to be told. I need to stop here for now. The second part of this story reveals what happened to the man who visited Mary Eagleclaw, the investigation that finally uncovered the truth, and the terrifying discovery that the massacre of those 6 Apache soldiers was connected to something far larger than one rogue colonel's brutality. Give me your okay when you are ready to continue, because what comes next will show you that the spirits of those warriors never rested, and that justice, even when delayed by decades, has a way of finding those who deserve it. The journalist who received Mary Eagleclaw's testimony was a woman named Catherine Reyes. She had spent 15 years investigating stories that the mainstream media refused to touch, cases involving government cover-ups, military misconduct, and crimes against indigenous peoples. When she heard what Mary had to say, she knew immediately that this was the most important story of her career. Reyes spent the next 2 years tracking down every lead. She filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests. She interviewed surviving family members of the 6 Apache soldiers. She traveled to Italy and walked the mountains where the executions had allegedly taken place. She consulted with military historians, forensic experts, and Native American elders who might shed light on what had happened over 60 years earlier. The obstacles she encountered were extraordinary. Documents that should have been declassified decades ago remained sealed. Witnesses who agreed to speak with her changed their minds without explanation. Her computer was hacked 3 times. Her phone records showed calls she had never made to numbers she did not recognize. Someone was watching her, and someone did not want this story to be told. But Reyes persisted, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. The first breakthrough came in 2008, when Reyes discovered the existence of Army Intelligence Report 773-44. The document had been referenced in other files she had obtained, but the report itself was supposedly destroyed in a records fire in 1973. Reyes did not believe it. She tracked down a retired Army archivist named Harold Patterson, who had worked at the National Personnel Records Center during the 1960s. Patterson was 84 years old and living in a nursing home in Missouri. He had less than 6 months to live. Patterson told Reyes that the fire of 1973 had not been an accident. He said that certain files had been deliberately removed from the archives before the blaze and stored at a secondary location. He did not know where that location was, but he remembered one thing clearly. Among the files that were saved was a folder marked with the designation 773-44, relating to what Patterson described as an incident involving Native American personnel in the Italian theater. With this information, Reyes intensified her search. She reached out to contacts in the intelligence community. Veterans who had grown disillusioned with the secrecy that protected crimes committed in the name of national security. In January of 2009, one of these contacts delivered a package to her home. Inside was a photocopy of the complete report, all 47 pages, along with a handwritten note that said simply, "The truth should not die with the guilty." What Reyes read in that report confirmed everything Mary Eagleclaw had told her, and revealed much more. Army Intelligence Report 773-44 documented the arrest, detention, and execution of 6 Apache soldiers for insubordination in March of 1944. It named Colonel Theodore Ashford as the commanding officer who ordered the executions. It named Major William Hartley as the officer who had issued the original order to kill civilians. It included testimony from Sergeant Frank Morrison, the military policeman who had witnessed Ashford's visit to the cellar where the soldiers were held. And it contained a chilling addendum, classified at the highest level, describing what Ashford called the necessary elimination of witnesses. According to the report, at least 4 other American soldiers who had knowledge of the executions were killed in suspicious circumstances over the following weeks. One died in a Jeep accident on a mountain road. One was shot by friendly fire during a patrol. 2 simply disappeared and were listed as missing in action. The report recommended that all records pertaining to the incident be destroyed and that no further investigation be conducted. The recommendation was approved by a general whose name had been redacted from the document. But the report contained one more revelation that would change everything. Attached to the main document was a map showing the approximate location where the 6 Apache soldiers had been buried. The map was hand-drawn and lacked precise coordinates, but it identified several landmarks: a distinctive rock formation, a ruined monastery, a stream that flowed down from the higher peaks. Reyes realized that with this map, it might be possible to find the graves. In the spring of 2009, Reyes assembled a team to search the Italian mountains. The team included a forensic anthropologist, a ground-penetrating radar specialist, 2 Apache tribal representatives, and a documentary filmmaker who would record the expedition. The Italian government granted permission for the search after reviewing the evidence Reyes had gathered. Local authorities provided guides who knew the terrain. The search lasted 3 weeks. The team covered dozens of miles of rugged mountain trails, checking every location that matched the landmarks on the map. They found nothing. The landscape had changed dramatically over 65 years. Forests had grown where fields once stood. Landslides had altered the contours of the hills. The ruined monastery depicted on the map had crumbled into rubble that was barely distinguishable from the surrounding rocks. Reyes was beginning to lose hope when something unexpected happened. On the 19th night of the expedition, one of the Apache representatives, a man named William Running Bear, experienced a dream. William was the great-nephew of Joseph Running Bear, the leader of the 6 soldiers who had refused to kill civilians. He had joined the expedition to honor his ancestors' memory and to bring closure to his family. In his dream, he saw Joseph standing on a mountainside, pointing toward a grove of twisted pine trees. Joseph spoke a single word in Apache, a word that William understood to mean here. William woke before dawn and told the team about his dream. The forensic anthropologist was skeptical. The filmmaker was intrigued. But Reyes had learned to trust things she could not explain. She asked William to lead them. They hiked for 4 hours, following William's instincts through terrain that was not on any map. The twisted pine trees from the dream did not appear to exist. But as they climbed higher, William suddenly stopped. He pointed to a depression in the earth beneath a cluster of ancient oaks. He said that this was the place. The ground-penetrating radar confirmed what William had sensed. Approximately 4 feet below the surface, there were anomalies consistent with buried human remains. The team began to dig. What they uncovered would be confirmed by forensic analysis over the following months. 6 sets of skeletal remains, each showing evidence of execution-style gunshot wounds to the back of the skull. Personal items that matched descriptions provided by family members. Dog tags that had been deliberately defaced but could still be partially read. And something else. Something that made even the skeptics fall silent. Around the neck of one skeleton was a leather cord with a stone arrowhead. It was identical to the arrowhead that the mysterious visitor had given to Mary Eagleclaw in 1946. Identical, yet here it was, still attached to the body that had supposedly been stripped of all personal effects before burial. Mary Eagleclaw had died in 2008, 1 year before the discovery. She never learned that her brother's grave had been found. But her granddaughter, a woman named Teresa, was present when the remains were exhumed. Teresa held the arrowhead that her grandmother had kept for 60 years and compared it to the one found in the grave. They were not just similar. They were exactly the same, down to the distinctive chip on the left edge and the faded markings on the leather cord. This was impossible. There could not be 2 identical arrowheads. Yet here they were, one in Teresa's hand and one emerging from the earth. The forensic team had no explanation. The tribal representatives looked at each other with expressions that combined wonder and fear. William Running Bear knelt beside the grave and began to pray in Apache. Later, when the expedition returned to the United States, Teresa Eagleclaw donated both arrowheads to the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. Experts examined them extensively. They could not explain how 2 objects that appeared to be physically identical could exist separately. Some suggested that the arrowhead given to Mary had been a replica, but materials analysis proved that both were authentic artifacts, at least 200 years old. Others proposed that the visitor in 1946 had somehow obtained the original and created a perfect copy, but no technology of that era could have produced such precise duplication. The tribal elders offered a different interpretation. They said that the arrowhead had existed in 2 places at once because the spirits of the dead warriors had willed it so. They said that Daniel Eagleclaw had sent a piece of himself to his sister, a tangible connection that transcended the boundary between the living and the dead. They said that such things were not impossible for those who walked between worlds, and that the 6 Apache soldiers had earned that power through the purity of their sacrifice. The remains of the 6 soldiers were returned to the United States in the autumn of 2009. A ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery, attended by descendants of all 6 men, representatives of the Apache tribes, military officials, and members of Congress. The soldiers received full military honors 65 years after their deaths. Their names were read aloud, their stories were told, and the flag-draped coffins were lowered into the ground with the respect they had always deserved. But the story did not end there. Catherine Reyes continued her investigation. following threads that led far beyond 6 murdered soldiers in the Italian mountains. She discovered that the order to execute civilians had not originated with Major Hartley or Colonel Ashford. It had come from much higher in the chain of command, from officers who believed that total war required total ruthlessness, and that moral objections were obstacles to be eliminated. She found evidence of at least 12 other incidents during World War II in which American soldiers had been killed or imprisoned for refusing unlawful orders. Native Americans, African Americans, soldiers whose backgrounds made them expendable in the eyes of commanders who viewed them as less than fully human. These incidents had been systematically erased from official records, the witnesses silenced, the families deceived. Reyes published her findings in a book that received critical acclaim but limited mainstream attention. The military denied everything. The government refused to comment. Most Americans never learned about the Apache soldiers or the conspiracy that had buried their story for over 6 decades. The reaction from official channels was predictable. Spokespersons issued carefully worded statements expressing sympathy for the families while categorically denying that any executions had taken place. They suggested that Reyes had misinterpreted fragmented documents, that the skeletal remains could belong to anyone, that the entire story was based on the confused memories of elderly witnesses and the overactive imagination of a journalist seeking attention. But Reyes had anticipated this response. She had gathered evidence that could not be easily dismissed. DNA analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to individuals of Native American ancestry. Forensic examination of the bullet wounds matched the caliber of weapons used by American forces in that theater. The dog tags, despite their damage, were authenticated by military historians, and the documents she had obtained, while the government refused to confirm their legitimacy, bore all the hallmarks of genuine classified materials, including formatting, terminology, and reference numbers that matched other verified records from the same period. In 2011, a group of congressional representatives introduced a resolution calling for an official investigation into the deaths of the 6 Apache soldiers. The resolution never reached the floor for a vote. It was quietly buried in committee, its sponsors warned by colleagues that pursuing the matter would damage their careers. One representative who spoke publicly about the resolution received threatening phone calls at his home. Another found that her office computers had been remotely accessed and files deleted. The message was clear. Some secrets were protected by forces more powerful than any individual politician. Yet the truth continued to spread through channels that could not be controlled. But among Native American communities, the story spread. It became a legend, a parable about honor, courage, and the price of conscience. Young Apache men and women learned about Joseph Running Bear and his brothers, about how they had chosen death rather than become murderers. The 6 soldiers became symbols of resistance, proof that the warrior spirit could not be broken by those who sought to corrupt it. And there were other stories, quieter stories, shared in whispers around fires and in the privacy of family gatherings. Stories about strange occurrences that seemed connected to the 6 warriors. A veteran of the Iraq War, an Apache man who had served as an Army Ranger, described an experience he had during a night patrol in Fallujah. His unit had captured a group of civilians suspected of harboring insurgents. His commanding officer ordered him to execute an elderly man who refused to provide information. The ranger felt a hand on his shoulder, although no one was standing behind him. He heard a voice speaking Apache, telling him to lower his weapon. He disobeyed the order and reported his commander for war crimes. Later, he learned about his great-great-uncle, one of the 6 soldiers killed in Italy. He believed that his ancestor had saved him from making a terrible mistake. A woman in New Mexico reported seeing 6 figures walking across the desert at twilight, dressed in uniforms from an earlier era. They walked in single file, moving without sound, and disappeared when they reached the horizon. She said they appeared every year on March 19th, the anniversary of the executions. A park ranger in Arizona found an old Army dog tag half buried in the sand near the San Carlos Reservation. The name on the tag was Thomas Whitehawk. There was no explanation for how it could have gotten there. Whitehawk had never returned from Italy, and all his personal effects had supposedly been lost. The ranger gave the dog tag to Thomas's granddaughter, who placed it in a medicine bundle and prayed for his spirit. These stories might be coincidences, tricks of memory, the natural human tendency to find meaning in random events, or they might be evidence of something else, something that our modern world struggles to accept. The Apache elders believe that warriors who die with honor do not truly die. They become guardians, watching over their descendants, intervening when necessary to protect the values they lived and died for. Perhaps the 6 soldiers who refused to kill civilians in 1944 are still on patrol, still standing guard, still saying no to orders that violate the sacred laws of human dignity. What does their story mean for us today? It means that courage is not just about facing enemy fire. Sometimes the greatest courage is facing your own side, your own commanders, your own country, and saying that there are lines you will not cross. It means that honor cannot be measured by medals or promotions or the praise of superiors. True honor is measured by what you refuse to do, even when refusal costs you everything. The 6 Apache soldiers did not save the world. They did not turn the tide of any battle. They did not live to see their grandchildren or grow old surrounded by family. They died in an unmarked grave in a foreign land, murdered by the very nation they had volunteered to serve. But they saved something far more important than their own lives. They saved their souls. They kept their covenant with their ancestors. They proved that the warrior spirit is not about killing, but about protecting, not about destruction, but about honor. And in doing so, they left a legacy that will endure long after the empires they fought for have crumbled to dust. If you are watching this video, you are now part of that legacy. You know the names of Joseph Running Bear, Thomas Whitehawk, Samuel Grey Wolf, Daniel Eagleclaw, Michael Sunwalker, and Robert Blackstone. You know what they did and why they did it. You know that they were not traitors or cowards, but heroes of the highest order. Carry their story with you. Tell it to others. Remember them when you face your own difficult choices, when the easy path leads toward darkness and the hard path leads toward light. And remember this above all. We serve a God who sees everything, who knows the secrets hidden in classified archives and buried in unmarked graves. We serve a God who values obedience to his laws above obedience to any human authority. Jesus Christ did not come to bring peace through violence, but peace through sacrifice, not victory through domination, but victory through love. The 6 Apache warriors understood this truth, even if they expressed it through the traditions of their ancestors rather than the language of the church. They knew that some orders must not be followed, that some doors must not be opened, that some souls must not be sold, no matter what the price. They chose the path of righteousness when everything around them demanded the path of blood. They chose to meet their Creator with clean hands and pure hearts, and God welcomed them home. Today, if you are struggling with your own choices, if you feel pressure to compromise your values, if the world is telling you that right and wrong are outdated concepts that have no place in modern life, remember the Apache 6. Remember that integrity is not a luxury, but a necessity. Remember that your soul is worth more than any career, any relationship, any earthly reward. Turn to God. Turn to Jesus Christ. Let them guide you through the darkness as they guided those warriors through their final moments. And know that when your time comes to face the final judgment, you will not stand alone. You will stand with all those who chose honor over convenience, truth over lies, light over darkness. The 6 soldiers are waiting, not with judgment, but with welcome, not with condemnation, but with brotherhood. They are waiting to embrace everyone who makes the same choice they made, the choice to remain human in an inhuman world. May God bless you and keep you. May He give you the strength to stand when others fall. May He grant you the courage of Joseph Running Bear, the faith of Thomas Whitehawk, the wisdom of Samuel Greywolf, the resilience of Daniel Eagleclaw, the heart of Michael Sunwalker, and the spirit of Robert Blackstone. And may their sacrifice never be forgotten, from this generation to the last. The graves at Arlington are marked now with simple white stones, identical to the thousands of others that stand in silent rows across that sacred ground. Visitors who walk past might never know the story behind those 6 names, might never understand the extraordinary courage those men displayed in a moment when courage meant certain death. But the stones are there, the names are there, and the truth, though it took 65 years to emerge, is now part of the permanent record. Sometimes justice comes too late for the living. Sometimes the vindication that should have been immediate takes decades to arrive. But it does arrive. It always arrives. Because there is a force in this universe greater than the lies of powerful men, greater than the secrecy of governments, greater than the silence imposed by those who fear what the truth might reveal. That force is called justice, and its source is God. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay faithful, and never stop searching for the truth that sets us free.